The time was approaching midnight when Agatha entered the city hospital in Michigan. She had been working as a night shift nurse for 15 years, and every time she passed the old, cracked walls of the building, she felt a mixture of fatigue and dedication. "Good night, Agatha," said Mary, an elderly nurse who was wiping the floor at the entrance. "Yes, it's my shift again." Agatha smiled tiredly, adjusting her worn sweater. After the divorce, life became especially difficult. The small rented apartment ate up half of her salary, and her daughter's college education required additional shifts. But Agatha never complained. Her Lisa was worth all the effort. The hospital lived its usual life. The old equipment occasionally made strange noises, reminding us of the insufficient funding of the institution. There was a shortage of nurses. Many had left for private clinics for better pay. "Agatha!" A voice suddenly came from the reception area. "Help is urgently needed." She quickly went to the voice. There was a gurney in the hallway with an elderly man lying on it. His gray hair was tousled and his clothes looked like he had been wearing them for weeks on end. "We found him in the park," the paramedic explained. "He had no documents. His condition was critical." A woman was standing next to the gurney. Her tired face was pale and her eyes wandered far away. "Do you know him?" Agatha asked her. "Yes." "My name is Candy," the woman answered quietly, wrapping her arms around herself. Her voice was trembling and her eyes were full of indescribable fear. "Is he a relative of yours?" Candy just shook her head, not giving a clear answer. Her hands nervously crumpled the hem of her old sweatshirt and her eyes were fixed on the floor. Agatha noticed the woman swaying. "Are you feeling bad?" No, I'm fine," Candy answered quickly, but it was obvious that she was barely standing. The doctor on duty was called immediately, and the patient was taken to the intensive care unit. Candy stayed in the hallway, sitting on an old plastic chair. She looked so lonely and lost that Agatha's heart clenched with compassion. As Agatha returned to her duties, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unusual about this story. Who are these people? Why don't they have any documents? And why does Candy look so scared? #. Chapter 2. A Small Act. The surgery lasted 5 hours. Agatha stood at the door of the operating room watching the paramedics transport the unconscious patient to the intensive care unit. His face was pale, but his breathing had already stabilized. "We did everything we could," Dr. Williams said tiredly, taking off his surgical mask. "But it is difficult to work without a medical history. Even the blood type had to be determined on an emergency basis." Agatha nodded. She noticed Candy sitting in the same chair where she had been left the night before. She didn't seem to have moved in all those hours. "Miss," Dr. Williams walked over to Candy, "we need any information about the patient. Allergies, chronic diseases, medications." Candy looked up, her eyes full of worry. I don't know," her voice trembled. "He didn't say anything like that. What about family? Is there anyone we can call?" "No," Candy answered, and there was so much pain in that short word that Dr. Williams just sighed and walked away. Agatha stayed in the hallway. She had long ago learned to notice details, a professional habit, and now she could see Candy's hands trembling as she clutched the old bag as if it were her only treasure. "Would you like some coffee?" Agatha offered. "We have a vending machine on the ground floor." "No thanks," Candy smiled weakly. "I've already had tea." Agatha noticed an empty paper cup on the windowsill. Judging by the label, it was the cheapest tea from the vending machine. She also noticed that Candy hadn't gone to the hospital cafeteria in all that time. After finishing her duties, Agatha went down to the nearest cafe. She often bought lunch there. The food was inexpensive and delicious. The owner, Mrs. Thompson, smiled kindly. "Double shift again, Agatha?" "Yes, it's a complicated case," she replied, looking at the menu. "I'll have 2 bowls of chicken soup and 2 turkey sandwiches, please." When Agatha returned to the hospital, she found Candy in the same place. She noticed that she was trying to hide the trembling of her hands as nurses passed by with trays of lunch. "You know," Agatha said, sitting down next to her, "we had some kind of glitch in the ordering system today. I was given a double portion by mistake. Could you help me eat it? I don't like it when food goes to waste." Candy froze, looking at the bag of food. A mixture of shame and despair flashed in her eyes. "I can't," she whispered. "Why not?" Agatha asked gently. "You haven't eaten anything since last night, and you need strength to maintain—" She trailed off, not knowing what to call the patient. "Robert," Candy said quietly. "His name is Robert." That was the first thing she said about him. Agatha silently opened the bag and put the soup and sandwich on the small table. "Eat while it's hot," she said simply. Candy took the spoon with trembling hands. The first tear rolled down her cheek as she lifted the soup to her mouth. Then the second. She ate slowly, trying to hold back her sobs. "Thank you," she whispered between mouthfuls. "Thank you." Agatha sat next to her, just silently supporting her. She knew that sometimes the most important thing was just to be there, not to ask questions, not to demand explanations, just to make the person feel that they are not alone. In the intensive care unit, monitors beeped, nurses passed by with reports, and the phone rang somewhere in the distance. It was a normal day at the hospital, but for the 2 women in the corridor, this moment was special, a moment of simple humanity amidst the chaos of life. Later, while filling out the regular reports, Agatha thought about how little it sometimes takes to support a person. 1 bowl of soup, 1 gesture of kindness. She recalled how she had once found herself in a difficult situation after a divorce, how difficult it was to ask for help. Perhaps that's why she couldn't pass by someone else's pain. And Candy. There was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there, and it was enough. On the 3rd day after the surgery, Robert regained consciousness. Agatha was measuring his blood pressure when his eyes slowly opened. They were an amazing gray color, clear and attentive, not at all like patients usually have after a major surgery. "Candy," was the first word he uttered. "I'm here," the woman answered, coming to the bed. She took his hand, and Robert smiled weakly. "How do you feel?" Agatha asked, taking his blood pressure. "Does something hurt you?" Robert just shook his head. No complaints, no questions about his treatment or condition. He just looked at Candy with such gratitude that Agatha's heart sank. That same day, the first stranger appeared at the hospital. A tall man in an impeccable navy blue suit approached the reception desk. "Good afternoon." His voice was quiet but commanding. "I am interested in the patient who was brought in 3 days ago, an elderly man. No ID." "I'm sorry, but we can't give out patient information to unauthorized persons," Rachel, the nurse on duty, replied. "Of course I understand." The man took out his business card. "I represent a certain organization that—" Agatha did not hear the rest of the conversation. She was called to another patient. But when she returned, she saw the stranger standing by the window, talking on the phone. "Yes, he's here." "No, he can't talk yet." Of course, I realized the importance of the situation. The next day, a woman came. Her pantsuit from a famous designer stood in stark contrast to the modest setting of the hospital corridor. She had a long conversation with Dr. Williams, showing him some papers. "What did they want?" Agatha asked the doctor later. "They asked about the patient's condition," he answered, frowning. "They showed me some documents that they represented his interests, but something doesn't add up. Why is he without documents? And why did these people show up only now?" By the end of the week, there were more visitors. They came 2 or 3 at a time, all dressed in expensive clothes with impeccable manners. Some of them tried to talk to Candy, but she disappeared every time she spotted them from a distance. "Agatha," Dr. Williams called to her one day, "have you noticed anything strange?" "What do you mean?" "These visitors. They ask a lot of questions, but they don't explain anything. And have you noticed their watches?" Agatha shook her head. "Rolex, and not the cheapest models." "Who are these people, and why are they so interested in a homeless patient?" "Maybe he's not so homeless," Agatha said quietly. That evening, when she was changing Robert's drip, she noticed him looking out the window. There was a bouquet of flowers on the windowsill left by one of the mysterious visitors. The expensive orchids looked out of place in a simple hospital room. "You know," Robert suddenly said, and Agatha was surprised. He rarely spoke first. "Sometimes the most valuable thing in life is the opportunity to be just a person." He fell silent again, but these words made Agatha think. The morning began as usual. Agatha came to her shift, checked on the patients, filled out some charts. Robert was feeling better. His wound was healing well. His vitals were stable. Candy, as always, sat next to him, reading him an old, battered book. The first hint of the unusual nature of this day came at 10 in the morning. Two men in black suits arrived at the hospital and began to inspect the grounds, writing something down on their tablets. They were followed by a group of people in business attire who quickly went to the head doctor's office. "What's going on?" Rachel asked as she approached Agatha. 5 black cars had already parked outside. Before Agatha could answer, a strange sound swept down the corridor. Everyone rushed to the windows and froze in surprise. A private plane was landing in the empty field behind the hospital. "Oh my God, it's an emergency helipad," exclaimed Dr. Williams, who had just come out of his residence room. The medical staff and patients were stuck to the windows, watching a group of people exit the plane. Their silhouettes were clearly visible against the morning sky, men in impeccable suits and women in business attire. "Agatha!" The head doctor's voice suddenly came through. "Come to my office, please." The office was cramped with the number of people. Behind the desk sat a man in his 50s with gray hair on his temples and tired but penetrating eyes. "Miss Pierce," he said to Agatha, "I'm Richard Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Industries. We've come for Jack Levinson." "Who?" Agatha asked in surprise. "The man you know as Robert," Richard explained gently. "Jack Levinson is the founder and former CEO of one of the largest technology companies in the country. 2 years ago, he just disappeared." Agatha felt dizzy. She remembered the modest patient in old clothes, his silence, his strange phrase about the value of a simple human life. But why? She could only ask. Richard sighed. "It's a long story. Jack was always an unusual man, a brilliant mind, incredible business intuition. He built a company from scratch and turned it into an empire. But 2 years ago, after his wife died, something changed in him. He started to withdraw," the woman standing by the window continued. "He came to the office less and less, hardly communicated with the board of directors, and then he just disappeared. He left a note saying that he was tired of corporate intrigue and the constant pursuit of profit." "We looked for him everywhere," Richard added. "We hired private detectives, contacted the FBI, but he seemed to have vanished into thin air. And now—" At that moment, the office door opened and Candy walked in. She looked small and defenseless among these people in expensive suits. "Candace Morgan," Richard stood up, "we meet at last." "You have no right," Candy said quietly but firmly. He had chosen this path himself. "Candace was Jack's personal assistant for 15 years, Richard explained, turning to Agatha. "The only person he truly trusted. And the only one who understood his decision," Candy added, looking up. "You all only saw the CEO, the millionaire, the man on the covers of Forbes. But I saw him suffering, suffocating from all this falsity and cruelty." Agatha remembered how Candy had looked after Robert. I mean Jack. her devotion, her care. Now everything took on a new meaning. When he decided to leave, I went with him, Candy continued. Not because he asked me to. On the contrary, he talked me out of it, but I couldn't leave him alone. For 2 years they lived like normal people, Richard said. No bank accounts, no credit cards, no anything that could give them away. Jack even changed his appearance, but the heart attack. He was happy, Candy said firmly. For the first time in years he could just live, just breathe. We hitchhiked, worked on farms, slept under the stars. He finally felt free. We heard a noise in the corridor. The patient was being taken for procedures. Normal hospital life went on, despite the drama unfolding in the head doctor's office. "What's going to happen now?" Agatha asked. "We're taking him to a private clinic," Richard answered. "The board of directors has already—" "No," came a firm voice from the door. Jack Levinson stood there leaning against the wall. His hospital pajamas stood in stark contrast to the expensive suits of those present. "I'm not going anywhere." "Jack, be reasonable," Richard began. "The company needs you. The shareholders—" "The company?" Jack smiled bitterly. "You know, Richard, I've learned one simple truth over the past 2 years. It's all an illusion. Money, power, status, none of it means anything when you're alone with yourself at night." He looked at Candy. "This woman has given up everything, her career, her comfortable life, her prospects, to support an old fool on his crazy escape. Not for money or profit, just because she believed in me. And you know what? Those 2 years were the happiest of my life." The office fell silent. Agatha looked at this man, tired, sick, but with clear eyes and a straight back, and realized that he was telling the truth. The day of Jack's discharge was a normal working day for Agatha. She was just finishing her rounds when Candy called her. "Agatha, can I talk to you for a minute? Jack would like to talk to you before he leaves." In the ward, Jack was already dressed in his usual business suit, which nevertheless looked expensive and elegant. "Agatha," he held out his hand to her, "I would like to thank you, not only for your professional care but also for your humanity." Agatha smiled shyly. "It's just my job." "No," Jack gently countered. "The way you took care of Candy when you thought we were just homeless was more than just a job." He was silent for a moment, looking out the window. "You know, over these 2 years I've thought a lot about what's really important in life, and I realize that it is people. People like you who make this world a better place simply because they can't do otherwise." Jack took an envelope out of his briefcase. "I have a proposal. There is a private clinic called St. Elizabeth's in the suburbs. I am one of its founders. We need people with experience and, most importantly, heart." Agatha felt her hands tremble. "Are you offering me a job? A salary twice as high as your current one, a full social package, including health insurance for you and your daughter, and the opportunity for professional growth. The clinic pays for staff training at various advanced training courses. This is a very generous offer," Agatha tried to speak calmly. "But Don't answer now." Jack put the envelope on the table. "Think about it. Talk to your daughter. You have a week." In the evening, Agatha talked to Lisa for a long time on the phone. "Mom, this is a great opportunity," her daughter said enthusiastically. "You'll be able to earn more money and not have to work night shifts. But this is a different neighborhood," Agatha sighed. "We'll have to travel." "Mom," Lisa's voice sounded familiarly stubborn, "you've been thinking only about me all your life. Maybe it's time to think about yourself?" A week later, Agatha stood in front of the majestic building of the St. Elizabeth Clinic. She accepted the offer, and today was her first day at work. "Good morning," the receptionist greeted her. "You must be Agatha Pierce. Come in. The head nurse is waiting for you." The new workplace was impressive. Modern equipment, clean, bright corridors, and friendly staff. But Agatha was most impressed by the fact that here, just like in her old hospital, there were dedicated people working here. During her lunch break, she received a call from Candy. "How are you finding the new place?" "It's strange," Agatha answered honestly. "But it's good." "You know," Candy smiled, "Jack said you remind him of his mother. She was also a nurse and always helped everyone who needed help." That evening, on the way home, Agatha thought about the strange twists and turns of fate, about how one small act can change a life, about how sometimes the most important changes begin with a simple act of kindness. She had a new badge in her bag: Agatha Pierce, Senior Nurse, St. Elizabeth's Clinic. But most importantly, there was also an envelope with her first paycheck, which would be enough to pay for Lisa's education and to pay off part of her apartment debt.